You're speaking? Listen, I'm not calling you, Sanjay. Jeffrey, you speaking?
Yes, you're a member for the city.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I rise to make my contribution to the Appropriations Bill for 2018, I do so recognizing the importance of the moment, importance with regards to the fact that this is the last presentation of estimates and expenditure in this current parliamentary term, and also recognizing the fact that these estimates and expenditures are being debated at a time when our country is going through some very, very serious and significant challenges. Let me first of all start by saying that yesterday I sat and I listened for several hours as the Honorable Minister of Finance gave what I would consider to be a very laborious and painful presentation that I'm sure the Honorable Minister himself would not have recognized that presentation yesterday because he certainly was not at his best. Let me say also that this Barbados Sustainable Recovery Plan 2018, which was presented yesterday, and which I have not really had the opportunity to go into any great detail. I think there's one thing, though, that is missing from this plan, well, in the preparation of the plan, and that is that the opposition was not part of that process. And the reason why I'm saying that is because, regrettably, this plan, if there is any good in it, will certainly not be executed by a Democratic Labour Party government. Where the estimates of expenditure and revenue are concerned, basically we are dealing in this 2018-2019 period with approximately $3.2 billion estimated current revenue, approximately $4.5 billion estimated total expenditure, which gives us approximately $1.2 billion of excess of total expenditure over current revenue. That is the state of play that we are facing today. And it is similar to last year's presentation. I believe it was slightly lower in terms of the excess. But that is what is facing this country today as I speak. And listening to the Honourable Member for St. John this morning in her presentation, the Honourable Member applauded the government for three things that I remembered: the Cultural Industries Bill, heritage, tourism, and then the Honourable Member spoke with regards to education in terms of the number of universities and medical schools that are being established in Barbados. And while I cannot fault the Honourable Member for what the Honourable Member said, certainly cultural industries, that was one thing that we supported on this side. And that is something that excited me when it was presented by the Honourable Minister, because having researched this subject in order to make my presentation, I recognize that this was certainly an area that this country could benefit from significantly, because it is an area where we do have a competitive advantage given the abundance of talent on this fair island of ours. Also, heritage tourism, the designation, UN designation that Bridgetown and its historic garrison carries, that also is an area that excited me, having recognized the fact that within the tourist industry, the tourism sector, that heritage tourists are considered to be the high spenders in tourism. They spend the most when they visit destinations. And so certainly those two areas I figured would be areas where a failing economy such as ours could benefit from significantly, and that government then would focus its limited resources in areas that could generate revenue and areas that could really put us on a growth path. And when we look at the estimates in expenditure and the 5 or 6 hours taken by the Honorable Minister yesterday, there was nothing really to indicate to us that this certainly was something that the government thought was a priority. And that, for me, was a disappointment. Listening to the Honorable Minister yesterday as well, and in relation to the questions posed by the Leader of the Opposition, we still have not heard anything regarding the level of international reserves today and the associated issue of whether or not the foreign reserves are adequate and whether or not they're under threat in terms of the monetary stability and the plans to address these. Also, dealing with how many Barbados dollars the central bank have printed to buy government debt in order to keep the government afloat. Nothing has been said about that. And in terms of the estimates presented yesterday, the reduction in subsidies and transfers of $87 million, nothing has been said by any honorable member on that side in terms as to how we are going to achieve that. And finally, in terms of the crumbling infrastructure that is negatively affecting the country in areas like sewage, the sewage system, roads, buses, garbage trucks, etc., we are yet to hear anything on these issues. But I believe in recognizing the fact that this is the last presentation in the current parliamentary cycle, I also think it is important that we look and see over the years, the last 5 years to 10 years, what the government has been able to achieve on its pathway to progress that was touted several years ago. And I recall that the government's programs and plans were based on development that was supposed to have been socially balanced, economically viable, environmentally sound, and characterized by good governance. And if we were to look at these issues in relation to what has been presented over the past several years, then I think that that would give us a clear indication as to exactly where we stand as a country. I think the economical viability of the plans, that certainly we are in a very serious situation, as we all know. This country is aware of that. When we look, for example, at the fact that we have not been registering the growth rates that we would like, when we look at the spiraling debt, and I remember the honourable member from St. John in a presentation this morning speaking to the fact that the Barbados Labour Party was a spending government, or worse to that effect. But when you look and see that in 2008, when the Barbados Labour Party administration demitted office, that our debt as a percentage of GDP was about 64.2%. And up to this point in time, that debt has been more than doubled. It now stands at 135%, or up to 145 or 150%, depending on the figures that you are using. And that suggests to me that what was said this morning by the honourable member needs to be re-examined. When we look at the significant increases in the cost of living in this country, with a government that came in with cost of living being the number one priority, significant increases in the cost of food, significant increases in utilities, and so on. When we look at the fact that our major economic engines have been misfiring and continue to misfire, and when we have created some new engines like the cultural industries, like heritage tourism, yet we still do not see it fit to allocate the adequate resources to those engines that hopefully those engines will cause the others to ignite. Socially balanced. Well, we had said several years ago that this, as a society, you cannot really manage the society unless you have the economic resources to be able to do so. And I'm saying today, Mr. Speaker, that we have a problem with the social balance in this country. And it is a problem, Mr. Speaker, that falls at the hands of the government that now holds the wheels. However, it's a problem that ought to concern government, opposition, civil society. All aspects of our society should be concerned about what is happening in terms of the social disintegration that we are experiencing in Barbados at this point in time. We see what is happening within our schools, within our communities, in all aspects of our lives. And this is something that I thought ought to have been spoken to yesterday in a serious way, because it is a very, very serious problem. And I said in my last budget speech in this honorable chamber, I said that this social disintegration, in my view, was even worse than the economic situation that the country is facing at this point in time. And I likened it on that occasion to a hurricane coming off the African coast, where we could see it coming. We could see the negative impact on the countries that it hit across, coming across the Atlantic. We had time to prepare, time to ensure that our country was protected from such, but we have not done enough in order to prevent some of the things that are happening. Nevertheless, it is a multidimensional problem that a unidimensional solution will not solve. It has to be dealt with collectively and urgently. In terms of social viability, we've had a situation where the middle class has been pounded into submission, that sometimes it's very difficult to make the distinction between working class and middle class. We've had a situation where the economic policies of the government have hit at the belly of the most vulnerable, especially those living within the St. Michael constituencies, where we have a lot of people who are unemployed and underemployed. And I certainly would have liked to have heard some plan of action that was designed to rescue such persons. So in terms of the social balance of our country, I think that the government has dropped the ball. Environmentally sound, we've had issues relating to the environment. We've had problems in sanitation in terms of the collection or the timely collection of garbage in our country. And although one cannot fault, in fact, I would give credit to the workers at Sanitation Services Authority, because you see them day in, day out, and even during the night, working very, very hard. But unfortunately, they just do not have the resources to be able to perform at a more satisfactory level. We have problems with sewage. And only yesterday, we heard or we learned about the situation at Bridgetown. And I credit the authorities for at least coming out and speaking in a timely manner to people, in the residents and the business places, in terms of informing people as to exactly what is transpiring at the Bridgetown plant. And I'm not prepared at this stage. I'm not going to second guess the authorities in terms of what they have indicated about what is going on there. But I would urge the authorities to continue to keep residents and people who transit the area informed as to what is happening, and I pray to God that it does not escalate into something that is beyond our control. In terms of good governance, well, that would have to be decided by the people of this country. Whenever that time comes, the people will make their decision, and we will know exactly where we are with that. The fact that Barbados has moved from position 31, I forgot to mention this with the social balance just now, from 31 to 54, 31 in 2008 to 54 in 2016, that is the United Nations Human Development Index. And although we are still doing reasonably well in terms of the region, certainly we are no longer punching above our weight. And we are more or less dropping out of featherweight or bantamweight. Because obviously, if we have a socially imbalanced situation with an economy that is not viable, then that is the result. Because all of those indices that are measured to produce what the UN does, those indices have been hard hit by the prevailing situation in our country. And so, let's move very quickly to housing. And I'm not going to say very much in this regard, because housing continues to struggle, national housing, in terms of being able to sustain itself. They too are suffering as a result of the situation confronting the country. And I recall the Honorable Minister with responsibility for housing speaking to much applause in terms of the conveyances and those people who were or are to be given their houses, and I have no issue with that. In fact, I am very happy for those persons, and any time at all that working class people are being given an opportunity in this country to own or earn anything, I think we would all support that. My only thing that I would say to the Honorable Minister of Housing through you, Mr. Speaker, is that in relation to the estimates of expenditure and revenue that were presented yesterday, there were some things that I was anticipating with regards to the same conveyances and the same handover of houses to people. And these things, when you look at maintenance, for example, which has been a serious problem within the Ministry of Housing and National Housing with the estates, especially the aging estates, but not limited to the aging estates, including some that have been recently constructed. Recently, within the last 5 to 6 years, there have been some serious issues. And I expected to see something, or to have heard something from the Honorable Minister of Finance yesterday in relation to what was going to happen with those persons whenever they get the keys and they can call, whenever they're able to call these units their own, what is going to happen in terms of the sewage system maintenance on these estates. And in some of the estates, there have been issues and continue to be issues. What's going to happen with the general maintenance that would have been required over the years due to the aging situation with a number of the estates, the electrical upgrades that were promised for so long, the structural defects that exist that need to be corrected. What's going to happen with the common areas now that we would obviously be having a situation within even a single estate where some units are now going to be owned by the persons who live in the units, and then there are other units that will continue to be owned by the National Housing Corporation. What is going to happen to the common areas? Who is going to determine the responsibility for those common areas within these estates? These are issues that have to be worked out before we could start really applauding ourselves in here, even though, as I said, I'm very happy that people are going to be in a position to own their own homes. I would like to say also that in terms of the urban tenantries program, I know about 3,000 lots were distributed by the last Barbados Labour Party administration, but what is happening with regards to a lot of those persons who are still occupying tenantry lands, people who would like to be able to improve their situation but cannot improve their situation since they do not own the land. Some people who've been living on the land, their families, for 40, 50, 60 years. And Mr. Speaker, this is one of the principal reasons why Bridgetown and the urban communities within St. Michael continue to look the same way as they did several years ago when one compares with what is happening in other parts of Barbados. The problem is that people have been living on land for several years that they do not own. And if you do not own the land, you really cannot do any sort of improvement with the houses that you own. And that is an issue. And I believe that this is something that should be resolved or should be dealt with as a matter of urgency by the government in the same way as the government is dealing with the handover of the units. And with those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, let me thank the constituents of the city of Bridgetown for permitting me to be of service to them in this honorable chamber. And I know that God willing and the will of my people in the city of Bridgetown that I will be returning to this chamber on the next occasion. Thank you.
Yes, the member for Christchurch South.